something that I think we need to chat about a little bit before we hop into the players that we would like to see involved in these camps was shortly ahead of the new year. And this was something that we actually weren't able to touch on in some of our news and notes. But coming off of the recent Men's World Cup in Qatar, it turns out FIFA has rejected requests to increase maximum squad sizes for 26 players on the roster at the upcoming World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. And there were some, pretty notable managers and head coaches who were kind of leading the way in terms of, wanting to have the same, perspective in roster sizes going into this summer's World Cup. So Germany's Martina Voss-Tecklenburg and Serena Wigman, they have sort of led the way on this to move from initially 23 player squads to a 26 player limit, just based on what they also did for the World Cup in Qatar. And so when this news dropped, understandably, we were sort of reacting to it in real time, and we were kind of like, well, this doesn't make sense to us how we're different 6 months apart and the roster sizes will be different.
Exactly. And even you look at last year for the CONCACAF W Championship, Vlatko Andonovski's roster was 23 players for the United States. But when you look at the Euros and the European Championships, both the men's and the women's had 26 players for the 2020 and the 2021 editions of those tournaments. So these enlarged rosters are becoming more and more common. And we have talked about it on here that when Qatar for the men's World Cup that just concluded, when they enlarged those rosters to 26, it was like, okay, the next one's going to be the women's World Cup in 2023. I was pretty shocked that FIFA rejected this expansion of the rosters just because of how it worked in the men's World Cup and kind of how we see that unfolded. And the fact that this was rejected, a little bit surprising to me. Now we are still 8 months out from the start of the Women's World Cup. I think that maybe we could see them return to this and change their minds depending on the meetings of the coaches, meeting of the nations, right, of all the different federations having that conversation and making a case for having 26 players on the Women's World Cup rosters. But I was a little shocked by this because those extra few players really make a difference in terms of injury, in terms of exhaustion. There's a lot of travel between New Zealand and Australia, and there are 9 host cities. And some of the groups that are playing throughout the group stages will be traveling hours via plane to get from one stadium to the next. That's exhaustion, that's fatigue, that's heat, that's player injuries. I don't know. I really wanted to see a 26 player roster for the Women's World Cup.
I'm with you on that. You're not going to find any disagreement from me. I think, again, when this news initially dropped, I was like, how, why, like, make it make sense. Some of the rationale around rejecting that sort of proposal was the fact, I guess the timing of this particular World Cup compared to the timing of the World Cup that took place in Qatar. The fact that this World Cup is going to take place in the summer, which is traditionally done for a World Cup, but apparently with domestic play already having been cranked up at that point in this point in the year, that was part of the rationale behind that, to sort of I guess tie that into potential injury as well. And I'm just kind of like, well, wouldn't that also be the counter argument for injury? Because that was something that we spoke about in our year in review, was the fact that we were constantly talking about injuries in 2022. And it's not like we haven't spoken about injury before on this show, but I think at the point we were trying to guesstimate the amount of players that we heard for ACL specific injuries. And I think at this point, the tally was from the collegiate level through domestic play or even international play. It was around 50 plus players, and how that number is just so jarring when you kind of take a look at it like that in just the span of the scope of 1 year. So the counter argument for that, I think you could make counter arguments on both sides for that, but with the domestic league coming into play. But there was also I saw online that some of the rationale behind that was that, making sure that there would be expanded rosters for the 2023 World Cup would perhaps give advantages to more the top programs, the top ranked
Right.
programs versus lower ranked programs. And I just think you can also make counter arguments for that as well. I mean, we constantly talk about, lack of opportunity when it comes to
Right.
this side of the game, and how rare that is for some programs out there, how minimal that is, and opportunities, aka are, is also tied to resources and how scarce those can be for certain programs. And this is one of the reasonings is saying like, oh, like it'll also expanded roster formats will only help top programs. So the answer is to limit even more opportunity for
Yeah,
some of these other programs. Doesn't make
I
sense to
agree.
me.
I don't really follow that rationale. I mean, like I understand it on one side of the coin, how allowing top nations to bring more personnel will strengthen them and only make them better and make it harder for the other nations to catch up. But I don't really believe that because everyone it deals with injury, right? Every single
Yeah.
nation, regardless of status, regardless of FIFA ranking. And I think that's one of the biggest factors of having an enlarged roster is that it allows a little bit more wiggle room and a little bit more understanding for these teams and these players that if someone gets an injury, there is someone else there to kind of step in and fill in the spot. That has been there all along. It's not like a bringing someone back in from home, traveling them wherever this team is. I disagree. I mean, I think there should be 26 players on the
Yeah.
World Cup rosters, and I think it would benefit the countries that are maybe making their debut at this World
Yeah.
Cup. I do.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think it'll be, there's more benefits, there's more pros and there's more cons to not having the extra players in the roster. I'm curious if this was rejected, are some of the things that we've seen over the last 2 plus years in international soccer, are they going to start sort of removing those things in this tournament? And that also gives me some concern as well. Like, are we going to start seeing an end to the five player
Yeah.
sub window? Is there going to be changes to, whatever they are, hydration breaks or concussion protocols, like that stuff like concerns me a little bit when it's kind of, you have this. But look, talked about how the timeline is, we're about 6 months or so out from this World Cup. Perhaps there might be we might get another update, another shift in perspective on this. And maybe there will be an opportunity for there to be 26 player rosters, with additional subs. And I hope so.